Thanks for joining the connection table today. It's really great to have you here, Catherine. People may know you from your day job or may know you from some of the board roles that you're part of. But maybe we might start. Would you like to introduce yourself in
Sure.
whatever
Thank
way you
you.
want, and we'll go in all different directions.
I won't go too far back because that will then take all of the time. But I suppose in broad terms, I I started an organisation called Food South Australia in 2010, and that was the merge of two organisations in South Australia: Flavour SA, who was a client of mine because I was consulting before then, and Food Adelaide. So that organisation came together, and I really, because I had done quite a lot of board work previously, I sort of said, I'll help manage the governance and then you can go and do what you want to do. As things transpired, I was very fortunate actually to be offered the role of the CEO. And it was one of those decisions, it was sort of one of those sliding doors moments where, having been a consultant for 15 years prior to that, it's fine being a consultant, but you're actually never responsible for anything and not even accountable.
Yeah.
And I felt like it was time to go back into that world where I had responsibility for delivering and, take full responsibility for everything and all those sorts of things. And sometimes I wonder why I ever thought that. But anyway, so I was there for 13 and a half years. Brilliant job, great organisation, great industry in South Australia, the food and beverage industry. Great people, but for me, from a growth point of view, it was time for a change. So I was fortunate enough to get the role as CEO of Family Business Association, and so I moved from Adelaide to Melbourne, and FBA covers the whole of Australia and New Zealand. So I've been there since July 2023. So that's kind of my day job summary. In terms of board work, predominantly it's been in the seafood industry. And so just over 25 years ago, my first seafood gig was as chair of the Prawn Fishery Management Committee, which was a state government advisory body. And at that point in time, the state government had lots of FMCs across all the different sectors. And it was a really good system where government and industry, research, etc., came together to make joint decisions. Over time, the FMCs were disbanded, and that tends to happen, across various iterations of government, etc. But that was the start of my seafood career, I suppose. I was also deputy chair of what was then the Rural Financial Counselling Service of South Australia. That was also a really interesting board role because we restarted as a new organisation. So there was a lot of politics around all of that, but it was really a fabulous role. I suppose the aside to that is my mum grew up on a farm in regional South Australia, and my grandparents were obviously on that farm, and then they became egg farmers. So agriculture sort of has been in my blood for the whole when I grew up, and agribusiness and that area is where I feel pretty comfortable. Anyway, back to seafood. So then I was involved. I was the inaugural chair of the Rock Lobster Advisory Council. So they'd never had an independent chair before. And then management committees, management plan development for seafood, the Fisheries Council of South Australia, a Commonwealth fishery that I chaired for, I think, about 13 years, which then led me to becoming a board member of Seafood Industry Australia 4 years ago, nearly 3.5 years ago. And then in year one, I became deputy chair. And then as of December last year, I was appointed chair of Seafood Industry Australia. So
congratulations, Catherine.
Talk about, but that's sort of a bit of a summary.
Yeah, there's so many bits that we could dig into. So South Australia is where you grew up, but where's home now?
Home is Melbourne now. So yeah. I moved to Melbourne 30 odd years ago and lived in Melbourne for 5 years, but I grew up in Adelaide and very much Adelaide born and bred.
Yeah, it's a great part of the world. And I mean, I think too, we find with some of the conversations that we have and the work that we do, South Australia, certainly from a regional perspective, it is across how to best manage regional business, how to best manage, working collaboratively and doing things like that. So it's there's a lot of really great learnings that the rest of Australia can take from the way that Adelaide and South Australia do things, I found, and particularly in the innovation space as well. I did quite a bit in that neck of the woods when I was in that chief entrepreneur world.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting observation, because I sort of really now have the opportunity to look at how South Australia does things and how Victoria does things. And I think South Australia is very small. And so with that comes that whole collaboration piece. Everyone knows everyone. And particularly,
100%.
From my point of view, I've spent a lot of time in regional communities from a seafood perspective. So Port Lincoln, I can't count how many times I've been to Port Lincoln. And other regional centres, particularly seafood, but even broader than that. So that's an interesting sort of nuance, I think, of South Australia. What I think Victoria's got a huge advantage about is they're very large regional centres. South Australia's a small population, Victoria's a large population. And, you look at what's happening in Geelong, for example, and then Ballarat, Bendigo. There's some very large regional centres that are way bigger than any of the regional towns in South Australia. In fact, Geelong probably might be heading to be almost closer, bigger than Adelaide.
To Adelaide, yeah, that's right.
So I think Victoria is a really interesting place and an opportunity where you can get the best of both worlds by having large regional centres but still being in a regional community.
Yeah. Yes. So I live in Gundawindi, which is just on the border of Queensland and New South Wales, and we have Toowoomba as our closest centre. So, and again, we often say from that southwest Queensland perspective, we need Toowoomba to do well. There's not really any. We are never going to compete with Toowoomba for various activities, the Gundawindis, St George's, Romas, those kinds of centres. But actually, we do well if Toowoomba does well. So that benefit actually flows across the rest of our kind of southwest corner. And I think that's an important thing for people to consider when we're looking at how does business work together? How do we grow industry? How do we do whatever? How do we provide grants to various things? This piece around competitive grants is not always going to be that useful to a conversation we were having before we hit record, because we actually need to get better at working together and looking at how do we play to our strengths and what do we do. So certainly, I mean, back to South Australia, the work that they've done in the defence side of things, they've really kind of owned that lane, I think. And so we looked at okay, well, South Australia is doing defence really well. WA really mining tech and how they look at things there. They were leaps ahead of some of the rest of us. And so, what we tried to look at from an entrepreneurial thing is, well, how does Queensland own sort of climate and ag tech? That could be the thing that we become known for. But how do we make it easy for businesses to work across the borders and boundaries of states? And I think that's the piece that will be great to see how they can unlock that in a little while. So coming back to some of the seafood side of things, what are the things that you've seen change? Part of what we're trying to be able to do within the connection table is get all of these people who are doing fantastic leadership programs, who have gone on to do, industry-based activity or whatever it might be, looking at how do we help support them into advisory roles, board roles, speaking gigs, whatever it might be. How did you spoke a little to the consulting role helping you end up into some positions. Was it with some of the seafood side of things, Catherine, was it somebody tapping you on the shoulder? Was it you applying? Can you talk a little as to how you ended up around some of those tables?
It's a very good question. I'd have to say I probably had a lucky break very early on with that prawn fishery management committee I was talking to you about. A friend of mine who's a very successful board director across Australia rang me one day and she said, look, I'm chair of this prawn committee. I'm having a baby, which I knew. Would you be interested in taking it over? And I said, my godfather, I don't know anything about seafood. Anyway, I said, sure. So I suppose the first bit of advice is say yes to everything. Give everything a go. So I went, sure. And then, it wasn't actually nepotism because I did go through a proper process and it was all had to be approved by cabinet. So interview process, all that sort of stuff. So it was merely an entree to an opportunity. Which came up as a tick. So that was really the first, and it really literally snowballed from there. And I think another bit of advice is, as hard as it can be, you've just got to be out and about all the time. You've got to be meeting people, you've got to be talking to people, you've got to be showing that you're interested in the subject matter. And I think for me also, everything I've ever done since my consulting days and then my career and board work, I've actually really genuinely believed in. In my own mind, I've got my own set of values that I've decided some sectors just aren't for me because I can't be passionate about them. Now, the next person can be. So I think, again, that authenticity piece around actually believing in what you're doing gives you that extra spurt of enthusiasm, and people can tell. They know whether you're genuinely interested in what you're doing or not. So I suppose, again, back to the seafood stuff, and even with rural financial counselling, being able to support a lot of primary producers, a lot of very small businesses often, fishermen run small businesses.
Absolutely.
They need someone to be the translator, per se, between their industry speak and government speak. And believe me, they are two different languages. And it doesn't matter if it's seafood or any other sector. Again, I suppose because of those roles and also my day job roles, I feel like I am that translator and have a good enough understanding. I've never worked in government, but those that have a much better understanding, but a good enough understanding of government. Certainly feel like I have a great empathy and understanding of industry.
Yeah.
So it's a real privilege to be sitting in the middle, and actually that's when advocacy comes in, and those relationships that you build, credibility, respect, and all those sorts of things, really critical.
It's seafood industry. I grew up on a grazing family farm, so cattle and sheep, and then we went into goats for a little while. And then I worked for the horticulture industry, and I was like, oh my gosh, the impact, the challenges, the markets. I found that so interesting from the horticulture side of things. Like there's they just seem to really have that much higher impact, was my observation, than some of our sort of broader grazing guys. And I think the seafood industry as a whole is, hats off to people in that space. It is really, the environmental impacts, the food safety, all of the rest of it. I think, we sometimes underestimate the challenges. We talk broadly around our ag industries. Man, some of them certainly it is a skill. It's a real technical skill.
A really good point. And in actual fact, there's this current a big piece of work being undertaken called The Futures of Seafood. And some of the points that you've touched on are really, really relevant. So seafood, again, crosses over a number of different government departments. It crosses over a whole lot of things. And the unintended consequences, particularly of some government decisions, have a real impact on industry. And then it becomes a bit of an amplified issue as well. So the futures of seafood is really a bit of a stake in the ground of where are we now and how do we sustain and support the Australian seafood industry, because there's a very high percentage of imported product that comes into Australia, which is fine. But I don't, in my heart of hearts, believe that Australians only want to eat imported seafood. I think it's a good option if they choose to do that. But I know from many, many people I talk to that people want access to good Australian seafood. And so we're at risk in some respects with all, as you talk about climate and environmental decisions and even around management compliance and all sorts of things that all add up to things not necessarily heading in the right direction. And hats off to the Australian government for supporting the futures of seafood. And we're also working with the Blue Economy CRC on this.
Interesting.
Really, it's I feel very fortunate being the chair currently, because this piece of work, I honestly believe, is going to set the industry up for the future as long as everyone keeps engaged in the process.
Yeah. And that process, back to the piece around, technical skill is part of it, the engagement, the ownership, bringing community along, bringing the supply chain along, so important. Like that as a skill set's incredible. Interestingly, so Queensland government at the moment have also got a blueprint out around the future of agriculture. So I'll make sure that if you haven't seen it, I'll connect you because they've got submissions open at the moment. And aquaculture as an industry broadly for us is, it's there, but they've always looked to see how it can be improved.
Yes.
Our Queensland Rural Women, the AgriFutures Australia Queensland Rural Women Award winner last year was a tuna farmer from Cairns, I think.
Yes, Kate Lavison.
Kate, yes. So I think that helped put, seafood as that business, but seafood more broadly on the agenda and into the news a little bit for us in our neck of the woods. Otherwise, it kind of gets lost maybe with some of our other commodities in our neck of the woods.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, someone like Kate, and there's plenty of other really fantastic women in the seafood industry, but putting herself out there to be part of that process, not only does she get the recognition, but the industry gets the recognition. And, I really applaud women who break the stereotype to some degree because it's a very male-dominated industry, but then actually do so much for the industry by what they do in their day-to-day job.
And I think particularly in this positive advocacy, it's not rose-coloured. We still can talk about the challenges and, what's happening to impact our industry, but to be able to have spotlights of good news stories, I think is so important. We were saying before we hit record, you've been doing some travel in recent times, both for Family Business Association, but also in your seafood advocacy role. Where do you want to start? Japan or New Zealand?
Well,
take me to either location.
I was literally 1 week in New Zealand, came home for the weekend, then went to Japan. So we might go in chronological order, I think.
Sure, do it.
So it was great, actually. So Family Business Association has had a New Zealand presence for about 6 years, and it's under my remit. So one of our partners, ANZ, wanted to host some dinners. So then the whole program was built around that. So I spoke at a dinner in Christchurch, then Wellington, then Auckland, 3 nights in a row. Which was pretty full on. But in addition to that, we spent some time in Wellington, which I'd never been to before, and met some of the politicians there. And I must say, my observation was, wow, you think you're similar, but you're not. So, Australia and New Zealand is quite different from a political point of view, and I hadn't really delved into it before that. So that was really fascinating doing that. And just this, I think the statistics in New Zealand are 75% of New Zealand businesses are family businesses.
Holy moly. Yeah. What's the statistic for Australia?
70.
So, yeah, rightio. Okay.
So so thinking about that, and this is why I feel I've got such an important role with Family Business Association, because I'm no advocacy expert. However, I know that if we don't talk to government and if we don't start to really properly engage, they don't know what they don't know. So we can't blame them for poor policy decisions if we're not talking and don't have the profile. So that's a big thing. From an FBA perspective, we're looking at growing our membership. We're looking at increasing our branding and advocacy, and all of that comes in together. So that's a strategic focus for us across Australia and New Zealand. So the New Zealand trip was really interesting. There's some amazing family businesses in New Zealand. So it's on my agenda probably 2 or 3 times a year to spend some time in New Zealand to make sure that business is growing, which it is currently, and just really, family businesses have got the best stories. They really do, and I think just from an FBA perspective as well. Succession planning and regional communities know all about succession planning, but a lot of them don't do it very well or don't want to do it. So that's a really core function of ours, is to help family businesses through some of the challenges of their succession, governance, and all those sorts of things.
It's so interesting. So, Catherine, my background's like environmental science, and so I worked with land care and catchment groups for a long time. I grew up on a family farm, so ag was definitely my home industry, let's say. And to your point, succession planning, for every one good news story, there were 55 horror stories of, nobody wanting to have Christmas together and all of the rest of it. And then I started my consulting business, 13 odd years ago, which meant I was doing more with small businesses in rural areas.
Yeah.
And I was like, hello, tyre shop in XYZ small town. You have exactly the same succession planning dramas or conversations than anybody. And I really was like, why have I never considered that any family business is going to have, whether you're talking about cattle or cars or fruit and veggies or whatever it might be, it really is going to be the thing that helps us keep and from a regional community perspective, how we stay viable and vibrant for these businesses to be able to change, have that intergenerational conversation and remain viable, or, stay sustainable along the way.
Selling is also another option.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Exiting, or the term is a liquidity event.
Yes. Well,
Key thing that I observed just in the couple of years I've been in the role is no one starts early enough. The 1 in 55 that's successful is because they've actually planned it over many years, and it's just ingrained in the way they do business. And do family as well. So it's really interesting. And then the governance side of things also very interesting, because it's not like a publicly listed company. There are nuances in family businesses from a governance point of view. So and we have accredited family business advisors as well. So part of our ecosystem, we have family businesses, but we also have accredited advisors, and that really works very well as well, because those people go through. We work with the University of Adelaide. And those advisors go through an accreditation with the University of Adelaide, and it's really, really worthwhile. So that was New Zealand.
Catherine, just before we move to Japan, and just in terms of the conversation that you're having there, from a membership perspective, do you want to just touch on, because there's a lot of people in the connection table that have an ag business background, predominantly family businesses, as well as others. Not everybody will be a family business, but there'll be quite a few. Do you just want to touch on the membership, how,
Sure.
Just in case there's people that want to connect with you around that?
Absolutely. So just Google us, Family Business Association, and you'll find us online. So from a membership point of view, we offer education, which is what I've just been talking about, and we offer it online as well as in person, and that's really acknowledging regional communities or people that can't actually physically get there. So that's certainly one option, and really great education courses. Strategic planning, for example, we do strategic planning for family businesses, and it's just a great way to start. So one step back from that, we have a diagnostic that we encourage our new members to do, so that it then spits out, these are the things you need to consider over the next couple of years. So that's, again, a great tool that we use. So we've got the education piece, we've got the events piece. So we have local events, we call them Coffee Connects and After Fives. People want to get together. We don't do them in very remote areas, but sort of in and around the fringes of major cities we do. We have what's called a State Insights Conference, which is in every state. And then in a few weeks' time, we have our Asia Pacific Conference, which will be in Western Sydney. And I was only reflecting on it this morning because I'll be doing a speech on it. Navigating change was the theme that we picked over a year ago. And how apt is that?
Whoa. Thanks, you lot. Was that your, you definitely had your crystal ball working then?
Absolutely, yeah. So that conference is on the 22nd and 23rd of May. And whilst, someone might not have heard it before, jump online and have a look at the program, because there's still a few spots left, and it is incredible, the program. And I'm actually really excited about it, because the turmoil that the world is in right now, every bit of sort of information from experts is really valuable. So we have that. Then we also have what we call our forum group program, and that's a peer-to-peer learning, independently facilitated. They meet face to face. However, we have a women's group which is online only. So, part online, part in person is quite challenging. So sometimes those that are travelling have to sort of dial in, but typically those in-person ones are done in person. And we are doing an emerging leaders program in Sydney at the moment, looking to launch in Melbourne. And we've actually got someone from a regional community in Queensland who flies down to Sydney for that emerging leaders program. And it's
awesome.
really taken off so well. And then, yes, as I said, we've got the Women's Forum group, and that is online only. So that, again, accommodates regional communities. We also, if we get the demand, from time to time, we have just a virtual, which is not women only. It's both men and women in a virtual forum. So again, if anyone has any interest, then they can certainly approach us, and we can put them on the list for the next virtual program.
Yeah, that'd be great. We'll certainly share that through. I think it is about knowing what's around and being able to hear from we need to widen our circles constantly, I think, which is why it's so important.
But all of that aside, we have a newsletter that goes out on a monthly basis. People can just subscribe to the newsletter and then see what we do. And someone might say, I really want to be part of it. And someone else might say, I don't need to be part of it, but I'm interested in what's going on.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really generous explanation of how people can be part of it all. Okay, take me to Japan. What were the conversations happening there? What's the insight that you're seeing?
And in light of the global turmoil, let's call it, what really struck me, so we were fortunate, we had a roundtable in the embassy with the ambassador. We then had some demonstrations. So it was actually a collaboration that's funded by the Australian government of seafood, wine, horticulture, meat and dairy. So every sector had their own demonstrations of their product. And then we had a press conference, and then we had a gala dinner. But what was really clear during the discussions during the day was Japan and Australia have had very long-standing relationships from a trade point of view, and even broader than trade. They, I think, are quite nervous about what's happening in other areas of the world. And so that long-term relationship and the security of supply and the security of not being sort of bumped off for someone else actually was very heightened during those few days I was there. So I suppose, Japan's a very mature market. So it's not this great growth market that some of the other Asian countries and possibly even, India and others, depending on what sector you're in. But it's a very reliable market, and they're very reliable trading partners. So, and they're just genuinely nervous about whether they're going to have the right supply coming into Japan. So Australia has a great opportunity to continue to cement that relationship and the supply. So that to me was something so it was a diplomatic trip as much as a trade trip.
I think, look at what's happening globally. We talk about relationships being important in business, and we talk about it, government perspective. I mean, that's the thing that I find has been really interesting at a global level is where relationships have really kicked in. And like you say, that's where Australia as a country have those long-term relationships, and it might have started out of trade, or it might have started out of, whatever it was. And that is really coming back to kind of work in some countries' favours and maybe not work in others. So it's some fun times ahead. So yes, well done choosing that as a theme for the conference all that time ago.
I know. I'm going out on that, I think.
I know. You've done very well there. Catherine, one of the questions that we always are keen to kind of ask people we're talking with, and again, through the connection table where we're either dealing with people who have a relatively new career in the sense of stepping into some of this board space, so they're new to the board world, or they are sort of mid-career and looking at more of that portfolio option, so it's really few different kind of spaces there, and one of the things that we often are asking or talking or wanting to build is, you know, what's the professional development? What are the things that you've done separate from maybe some of the technical skills? Have you got any thoughts around there around, you know, professional development you've done that you really enjoyed, or what you're seeing too in terms of what some of your members are looking at maybe too?
Look, I think if anyone wants to be on a board, they've got to do governance training. So whether it's AICD or whether it's other, there's a lot of different offerings around governance. So I think that, I mean, boards are all about, well, should be all about good governance. And so I think without that, like, you've got to invest in that type of training to, and it is hard to break into it, to be perfectly honest. So, you know, typically a lot of boards are volunteer boards, and don't underestimate the responsibility of a volunteer board versus a very highly paid board. Your responsibilities are exactly the same. Some governance training you might do would put you off for life ever being on a board, because it's a risky game. So, but it is very rewarding, and I think I've got this real luxury, I think, where I'm a CEO by day, but I'm a chair or a board member, not by night, but, you know.
But yeah.
And so I report to a board, but I've also got people that report to me as the chair or as the board. So it's but, you know, that's a lot of years of working around all of that. And I think also I think the earlier you can be broad, the better, because otherwise seafood has been the predominant portfolio I've held, but I was on the Glenelg Football Club board, for example, in Adelaide before I left, and I was on there for 6.5 years, and I was the first female board member. I love football, and I go to the football a lot in Melbourne. That was not so easy. It was an opportunity that came up. It was a referral, so it was easier than it could have otherwise been, just coming, you know, from out of nowhere. But that's a sector that I'd played a lot of sport, I'd been involved in sport, but never in sport governance. So I really love the fact that I can put that on my CV as well.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
People typically pigeonhole me in primary production in seafood, agribusiness at a pinch, but then I've got sport in there as well. And so I think not specialising too early gives you the best sort of runway as well. So anyway, there are just a couple of ideas, but you cannot entertain being involved in a board unless you're prepared to do the training in advance.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. You mentioned referral for the footy board, and that somebody put you forward when they were going off on maternity leave. Was part of that because you had spoken about your desire to join a board?
Well, actually, the maternity leave one was the prawn one. The football club one was again another friend of mine, a very senior operator, and he rang me one day and he said, "You got to come on the Glenelg board." And I went, "I haven't got time." And he said, "Yes, you have." He said, "They need a commercial. They've all identified they want a commercial female on the board, and you're it." And I'm like, right. And I kind of thought, do you know what? I really don't have time, but you make time. And again, that was a great opportunity. So it took a bit of time because I was the first female on the board, that was a bit of an adjustment as well for the board members. But they were fantastic. So that was really good. But then it was at the time that women's football was coming in, and the cultural change that has been required for women's football is really significant. So I then took it upon myself that I would then become the advocate for women's football. So I went, and I think being in a football club environment, you've got to be involved, you've got to be engaged. Wherever possible, I was at every game, whether it be the men's, the women's, just so that you're out and about. Then the members actually see you and they know that you're keen about what's going on. You're supportive. You have this real privilege of going into change rooms and seeing people, after the game and win or lose. But that women's football thing was a really great opportunity for me because people were scratching their heads in many respects going, how does this all work? When women's football first started, the women were getting changed in their cars. There were no change rooms
Yeah.
for them. Now, it's still not brilliant, but it's come an
Awesome.
awfully long way.
Yeah.
So again, they're the sorts of things where I fell into that a little bit and didn't have time, made time and loved it.
Yeah, good on you. I mean, just on the women's sport piece, isn't it amazing to see? You know, I love hearing the stories of where people triumph over adversity, right? Like that hero journey, and we're finally starting to see some female examples of hero journeys. But you know, the spend on women's sport, the sponsorship, the benefits, the eyes on sport teams now, who's doing really well. I mean, it is just making, you know, we've just got so many examples now in women's sport, both team sports and individuals.
Well, you look at the Matildas, you
100%
know,
right.
and not many people would have known who the Matildas were. But then on the flip side, athletics, for example, has been a bit in the doldrums, and you get gout, and everybody wants a piece of athletics now, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. And timing-wise, you know, in the lead up to the Olympics, some of us in Queensland are a bit sick of listening to the Olympics. I've been talking about it forever, and it's good and it's bad and it's here and it's there. But it is going to happen. And so, you know, it's a great opportunity for lots of our kids to be starting to look to that and to think about, you know, again, how does that help business? What's the legacy piece of this? You know, how do we all kind of use that as a bit of a kind of vision, a point on the horizon we're going to have to work towards. Can I dig in a little bit around so I think the governance piece for training and professional development is really important. Like you said, there's AICD, but there's others. What are your sort of, you do a fair bit of travel, what are the podcasts you listen to? What are the audio books you might have? Is there any of that other kind of I'm
actually not very good on all of that. I typically, if I'm out walking, I typically listen to the radio and sort of more current affairs stuff. I do. The AFR has a Chanticleer podcast that I do listen to. There's also Caroline Wilson, who is very well known in Victoria for her football prowess, and she's a journalist as well. And Corey Perkin, they do a podcast called "Don't Shoot the Messenger." And I really enjoy it. I listen to that most weeks. So then I don't really listen to audio books. I've got a pile of books that I keep thinking I must start reading all of these. And
me too.
Time is a problem.
Yes, I must admit, when my husband sees me walk in with another book or another couple of books, and he's like, "What's that pile doing?" You know, I'm like, no, it's all. The intention is honourable, I say. Oh, dear. Catherine, I've so enjoyed our conversation today. Is there anything else you want to touch on? Anything else that you want to make sure people know about or are considering before we wrap up?
The only probably other main thing I'd like to talk about is National Family Business Day is on the 19th of September every year, and any family business, regardless of whether they're a member of FBA or not, we want to be really loud and proud and support family businesses. So we'll have a whole lot of collateral and assets on our website that if any of your listeners are a family business, jump on board with that. But of course, if they subscribe to our newsletter, they'll find out about it coming up. But that's a really important day to really highlight to the Australian community that family businesses are important.
Absolutely. We will be putting that one on the calendar, and certainly happy to share through our newsletters and LinkedIn page and things like that, Catherine. That's really important.
Excellent.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me today. We've had quite the intimate conversation, but this will be a really valuable resource for people to come back and talk to. I really appreciate the way in which you shared so openly and generously today. I think that piece around, you know, say yes to opportunities, the going broad early is actually a really good one for people to think about, and the role in which we can show up to some of these different opportunities. I think so important. I really appreciate it, Catherine.
Absolute pleasure. Lovely to chat, Julia.
You too. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.